The day I opened the door to that broken farmhouse, I realized something was very, very wrong. At first, it looked like nothing more than a cruel joke. My son had just inherited a $5 million penthouse overlooking the city skyline, and I had been left with a collapsing farm at the edge of nowhere. But when the door creaked open that afternoon, a cold feeling settled in my chest. Because someone had been inside, and they had been waiting. My name is Daniel, and until a few months ago, I believed my life was simple. Not perfect, but honest. For 30 years, I worked beside my closest friend, Martin. We weren't just business partners. We were family. At least that's what I always believed. We met when we were both in our early 20s, working at a small agricultural supply company. Neither of us had money, connections, or any kind of safety net. Just long hours and stubborn determination. Martin was the one who convinced me we could build something of our own. Why keep making other people rich? He used to say, leaning back in his chair with that confident grin of his. Let's do it ourselves. So we did. We started with almost nothing. A rented shed, 2 aging trucks, and more optimism than sense. But slowly, year by year, the company grew. Farms trusted us. Suppliers worked with us. And eventually, we built a respectable business distributing farming equipment across the region. Through all of it, Martin was there. Birthdays, holidays, my son's graduation, my wife's illness. When my wife passed away 8 years ago, Martin sat beside me through the entire funeral service. He didn't say much, just placed a hand on my shoulder and stayed there. That meant something to me. It meant everything. Over time, though, our lives moved in different directions. Martin loved the city, the energy, the new restaurants, the expensive apartments. He had always been more ambitious than I was. I preferred quieter things. The countryside, old routines, a steady pace. But our friendship never seemed to change, or at least, I thought it hadn't. My son Jason adored Martin growing up. He used to call him Uncle Marty. Martin would bring him small gifts from his business. Trips, mini toy tractors, baseball caps, strange snacks from other states. When Jason became an adult, Martin even helped him get his first internship in the company. Looking back now, maybe that was the first moment things started shifting. Jason was smart, quick with numbers, charismatic in ways I never was. Martin noticed that immediately. He's got potential, Martin told me one evening after a company dinner. More than either of us had at that age. I remember feeling proud hearing that. What father wouldn't? Over the next few years, Jason rose quickly in the company, faster than most employees ever did. Martin seemed thrilled about it. Sometimes I even joked that Martin treated Jason more like a partner than an intern. But there were small things I didn't question at the time. Private conversations between them that stopped when I walked in. Financial discussions I wasn't included in. Late-night meetings in Martin's office. Whenever I asked, Martin always brushed it off. Just preparing the next generation, he would say with a chuckle. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? We had spent 3 decades building a life together. Then 6 months ago, everything changed. Martin died suddenly. A heart attack, they said. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning. One moment he was planning a new expansion project. The next he was gone. The funeral was enormous. Business partners, investors, politicians, people I had never even met. Standing there in that crowded hall, I realized something strange. Martin had built a much bigger world than the one I knew. But grief has a way of blinding you to questions. A week after the funeral, the lawyer called us. There was a will. Jason and I sat across from the lawyer in a quiet office downtown, while he read the documents. At first, everything sounded normal. Martin had donated a large portion of his wealth to charity. Several properties were divided among distant relatives. Then the lawyer cleared his throat and turned a page. To Jason Whitmore, he said, adjusting his glasses. Martin Hayes leaves the penthouse apartment located on Harbor Avenue, valued at approximately $5 million. Jason looked stunned. Are you serious? He whispered. The lawyer nodded. I smiled, though a small knot formed in my stomach. Martin had always been generous, but this was unexpected. Then the lawyer continued. And to Daniel Whitmore? He paused. Martin leaves the property located at Red Hollow Farm. The lawyer slid a folder across the table. Inside was a photograph. An old farmhouse stood in the middle of overgrown land. The roof sagged slightly, and the wooden porch leaned at an awkward angle. I frowned. I didn't know Martin owned a farm, I said. The lawyer nodded slowly. It was purchased about 12 years ago. 12 years. I had worked with Martin every day during those 12 years. And yet, he had never mentioned it. Jason leaned over to look at the photo. Well, he said lightly, maybe it's got potential. But his voice sounded distracted, like his mind was already somewhere else. Maybe inside that $5 million penthouse. The following week, Jason moved into the city apartment. I drove out to see the farm. Red Hollow sat almost 2 hours away from town, at the end of a narrow dirt road surrounded by tall trees. The closer I got, the quieter everything became. No traffic, no houses, just wind brushing through the fields. When the farmhouse finally came into view, it looked even worse than the photo. The paint had peeled away years ago. Several windows were cracked. The barn leaned slightly to one side like an exhausted old man. I stepped out of the truck slowly. The air smelled of dust and dry grass. For a moment, I wondered why Martin had left this place to me. There had to be a reason. Martin never did anything without a reason. I walked toward the front porch, the wooden boards creaking under my boots. The front door looked old but sturdy. I pulled the key from my pocket, the one the lawyer had given me, and slid it into the lock. For a second, I hesitated. A strange feeling crawled across the back of my neck, like someone was watching. I told myself it was just nerves, just imagination. I turned the key. The lock clicked open. Slowly, I pushed the door inward. The hinges groaned softly as the door swung open, revealing a dim, dusty living room. At first, it looked empty, but then my eyes adjusted to the shadows, and that's when I noticed something that made my heart stop. The floor was covered in fresh footprints, not old ones, not dusty ones, fresh, and leading directly to a chair in the center of the room, a chair that hadn't been there in the photograph. I stepped inside slowly, my breath tight in my chest, because sitting on that chair, facing the door, was someone I never expected to see there. And the moment our eyes met, I realized Martin's will had been hiding something far bigger than a broken farm. The moment our eyes met, the air inside the farmhouse felt heavier, like the room itself was holding its breath. For a second, I couldn't move. The figure sitting in the chair slowly leaned forward, the old wood creaking beneath them, and then the light from the doorway reached their face. "Jason?" My voice came out as little more than a whisper. My son stood up slowly, brushing dust from his jacket like he'd been sitting there for a while. "You took long enough," he said. I stared at him, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. "You live 2 hours away," I said quietly. "How did you get here before me?" Jason didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced around the room as if he were inspecting the place. "This farm looks even worse in person," he muttered. Something in his tone felt off, not angry, not nervous, just distant. I stepped further inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. "Jason," I said slowly, "how did you know about this place?" That question hung between us like a heavy fog. For the first time since I arrived, Jason looked directly at me. Then he sighed. "I was wondering when you'd ask that." The word sent a strange chill through me. "Oh, what do you mean?" Jason walked past me toward the open door, looking out over the empty fields. His hands slipped casually into his pockets. "Dad," he said, "how well did you really know Martin?" I frowned. "Better than anyone." Jason gave a small, humorless laugh. "That's what you always believed." I felt a sharp sting at those words. "Jason, what is this about?" He turned back toward me, studying my face carefully, almost like he was deciding how much to say. "You trusted him completely, didn't you?" "Of course I did," I said. "He was my best friend." Jason nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. That's exactly what he said, too. A silence filled room. Dust floated through the light coming from the doorway. Then Jason walked to a small table in the corner of the living room. I hadn't even noticed it before. On top of it sat a worn leather folder. Jason picked it up and held it in his hands. "Martin asked me to come here today," he said quietly. My stomach tightened. "That's impossible," I said. "He died 6 months ago." Jason shook his head. "No," he said calmly. "He asked me a year ago." My heart began to pound. "A year?" Jason opened the folder slowly. Inside were several documents, and what looked like handwritten notes. "He told me that one day," Jason continued, "you'd stand right where you're standing now." My mouth felt dry. Why? Jason flipped through the papers before pulling out a single sheet. Because this farm isn't really an inheritance, he said. It's a test. The word echoed in the quiet house. A test? I repeated. Jason held the paper up slightly. Martin believes something about people, he said. He believed money reveals who someone really is. I stared at him. And what does that have to do with me? Jason's eyes softened for the first time since I arrived. Everything. He walked closer and handed me the paper. I looked down at it. It was Martin's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. Daniel, if you are reading this, then you have done what I hoped you would do. You came here yourself. My hands trembled slightly as I continued reading. For years I watched what success did to the people around us. Investors, partners, even family members. The moment large amounts of money appeared, loyalties changed. I glanced up at Jason. He gestured for me to keep reading. So I designed an experiment. My heart skipped. Jason knows about it. He agreed to help me. I felt the room tilt slightly. Jason, I whispered. He looked down. I didn't know everything, he said quietly. Not at first. I looked back at the letter. The penthouse is real. The farm is real. But neither of them are what they seem. My pulse quickened. If Jason rushed toward the money and left you behind, then I would know the company I built would not survive another generation. I swallowed hard. But if you came here curious rather than bitter, then it means something far more valuable still exists. My voice shook slightly as I read the final line. Trust. I lowered the paper slowly. The farmhouse suddenly felt very different. Martin bought this place 12 years ago, Jason said quietly. He built something underneath it. My head snapped up. Underneath? Jason nodded. He told me if you ever came here, we should show you. He walked toward the back wall of the living room where an old wooden cabinet stood. I watched as he pushed it aside. Behind it, hidden in the floorboards, was a metal door. My breath caught. Jason knelt and pulled a small key from his pocket. This, he said, inserting the key into the lock, is why Martin left you the farm. The lock clicked. Slowly, Jason lifted the metal hatch.